you said to me, "Oh, Pete, you're going to get 2.5 for your property because even though it's worth 2, I'm already going, I can buy a boat, I can buy a car, I'm going to have the holiday." So, and I've seen people list with agents, but then later on they've changed agents and they've sold at a realistic price, but it has damaged the value of the property of how they've pitched
I've seen real estate agents selling their own homes and have them overpriced. So I think first things first is, again, when I look at human nature, and again with our own properties, it's we can get a little bit closer to them, especially if we list them. So it's never ever to blame someone.
That's right, because my yellow letterbox looks better than the green letterbox next
Oh,
week.
yeah.
So my house is definitely worth
You've sold, I've sold, and I think both we thought our properties...
Welcome all to the Solid Ground podcast. So we're here again today to share tips and ideas on anything to do with buying property. So today we're lucky to have Tim Mumford, who owns the DY office with Stone, and we're going to ask Tim, how should you be looking at the market if you're positioning to buy or to sell, and what are some of the questions you want to ask your agents, and what's important when you're getting your property ready. So we're going to jump straight into this, Tim. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, you sell a lot of property around the Northern Beaches. So I know right now sellers are sort of hearing lots of noise around auctions, off-market, private treaty. How would you, if someone's asking you and saying, "Tim, I've got this lovely house here, what should I do with it? What sort of market? What's the right method of sale?" How would you look at that in that first conversation?
I think the biggest thing is when people it's interesting when people ask me a question, how is the market? Well, there's about 7 markets going on in a particular market. So what kind of property you're referring to, what price point. So that's the first element. So there's not one rule fits all. I think probably at the moment what we're seeing is markets fluctuate faster, more rapidly. So if I went back, I've now been doing this quite a while, but even let's just say a decade ago, predictions were you could usually get close to right for about 3 to 6 months versus adverse effects. But I've seen markets within markets shift within weeks, and for the last, let's just call it the last 6 to 8 weeks, we've seen some really big fluctuations. So for me, it's more about not whether you buy or sell first, but what are the methods that you can reduce some of the risk.
So maybe on that, let's look at private treaty and auction, which is probably the 2 most common that people understand.
Yes.
Just say I'm deciding to sell my house.
Yes.
And I guess houses and units are different. Let's just pick one and talk us through why you might consider an auction first, and then maybe another one why you might consider private treaty. And I know it very much depends on the customer, sometimes their method.
Yeah.
But talk us through a bit more of that. So I guess someone trying to decide what method they should use might work for them.
Well, I think if let's just take the Sydney market in general, I think basically most of the buyer population, if we move through the COVID times where 95% of properties in our markets were marketed as auction, unless they sold beforehand, it's more so how do the buyers react to the process too. I look at auction basically as both methods, and I think a lot of agents don't do a great job of describing
So on that though, when
Yeah.
you're looking at both methods, just drill a bit deeper. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so what I mean is the auction, effectively what you're really doing is creating a time period or a deadline for both buyers to be able to make some kind of decision, and also you as the owner. I think human nature generally is if there is some kind of deadline, and whether that's 4 or 5 o'clock at the post office, we generally react with a little bit more urgency to someone that has something that has a deadline versus, for example, for sale private treaty. There's actually no reason why a buyer would say, "Oh, well, we're heading away on Friday. Do we want to try and get in this Wednesday, or do we wait a couple of weeks?" And that's usually what you find with for sale. Your days on market generally are longer. So I think what the auction method necessarily does, it creates a sort of line in the sand where it basically says to the marketplace, by this point, we'd either like to be running an auction or closing out competition on the property. So it gives a really clear idea for people. And that can work in a way, let's say there's a young family that's planning to pick a weekend to go away, and they either like your property or they'd like to make a decision on your property. They know that there's a period of time where they probably expect that property to sell. But what I like about it actually does, it gives you both methods. So that's not to say that someone can't come in and make the right offer on the property to buy it beforehand. So you're actually getting for sale or auction, and you get to decide as the seller which basically operation you choose through the campaign.
And I think too, what I've seen also, Tim, over the years, that if there's a few properties on the market, say one's private treaty, one's auction, as you said, auction's going in 3 or 4 weeks, and they like both, it's going to drag their attention potentially to the auction not to miss out. because they know there's a deadline to either make an offer before or buy it on the day, where the private tree, they may think they have more time. So it can sort of corral buyers all of a sudden to your focus onto your property.
Yeah, and I think the way I would usually say to someone that's selling a property, effectively look at a normal 4 to 5 week process for an auction. The way I look at it is I go, your first 10 days on the market, it's basically about assessing interest, sort of discovering who your buyers are and or encouraging those buyers to come back and see the property. I usually would then say to the purchasers to say, look, we're going to get through this first 10 days so I can give a lot of information to the owners. And it's not to say that you can't buy the property before auction, but we're going to sit down with the owners after that period of time and just have a discussion around what's the fairest way to include all the buyers and have equal and fair competition. So at that point as a seller, you can decide based on where you're sitting, would you like to run the auction process so that you've got enough interest at that? Or maybe in these market conditions, you could have 2 buyers with very different terms. So they could be at a price that you're happy with, but one wants to settle in 6 months and one wants to settle in 6 weeks. So that allows you to have control prior to the auction.
So just shifting a bit now to the term soft launch.
Yeah.
We hear that used a bit.
Yes.
What's it mean? And is there a time that you'd actually use it when you might think it's a smart move for sellers or not?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and this can be called a lot of different terms, and this has evolved as marketing has. So if we go back to, let's just call it without advertising or off market, which was called once upon a time, this was actually when we had paper advertising and really big expensive campaigns. So it was actually used before you were basically having this big cost exposure to figure out, is there a easier and quicker way that you could sell off market to the right person, or you could get some price discovery. So these days, and more so in a market that is moving more rapidly, so at the moment I would say, like I almost would do it on any property, and we do, is that it allows an owner to get their property to a point where it's presented. We usually get photos and floor plan done at that point, and to take some of the market through with qualified buyers, and I call it more an X-ray. So it's sort of like an X-ray before the operation. So essentially you can gain buyer feedback. Is there any other little changes we might want to make to the property? Is there some things as both as an agency and or as an owner that maybe we could tweak to make the property more presentable? But what you'll tend to get is a very good median on interest on price. So hypothetically, and especially as you move to the higher end properties, those variations can be quite big. So I think what it's doing through what I would call as an X-ray process, it's allowing an owner to get a better understanding on where they can sell the property quickly and at a certain price what might take a little bit more time. Definitely for those looking to buy first, I would say that is a must-do because as we can see over the last 8 weeks, the market's fluctuated really quickly.
It does, and it can move quickly.
Yeah.
So there's a question. I know everyone is different. There's circumstances. Some can afford to sell later. Some can sell prior.
Yeah.
Just talking that through. Just say I'm your client. I'm sitting with you and I'm saying, Tim, I'm wanting to move because I want to go near the grandkids on the Gold Coast, example. And I want to buy something there, but I want to know what I'm going to get for my house. How would you guide people in that direction?
I think you want to do that simultaneously. So I don't think there's a right and wrong to where people feel more comfortable. But if I look at, let's call it a variety of options, off market, a market X-ray or a soft launch, I would say to a client, look, let's get the property photographed. Let's get a floor plan done, because I know most buyers, the first thing they ask when we say we've got a great listing coming is, can you send me some information? I'm flat out at work. Or if you've got a buyer that's out of area, they're like, can you please get me some info? So we get that done first. And then what we do is we move into that off-market process. And what I would say to them, this gives you control, flexibility, and there's no rush. We would take probably the more qualified buyers from the market that have missed out on properties and or made offers at and above the price point of the house that we're selling. So we already know that they've got the budget to be able to purchase. At the same time, I would say to that client, look, let's get you up to the Gold Coast. Whilst we're maybe even go away while we show the house, let's get you up there and see what you're looking at and to buy, right? So we could say hypothetically, they were looking to sell in Sydney for $4 million and they were wanting to relocate to the Gold Coast for $2 million. We would take buyers through their home that have a budget of $4 million and above, and we'd go and look at some properties in the Gold Coast between 1.7 and 2.5 to get an idea on the market up there. Once they get back, we'd be able to present them with some information on where the market sees the value of their property, but simultaneously, they've also been able to get an idea on what they want to purchase. We'd then sit down and go, look, let's look overall at what your changeover costs are and what's the realistic time that's going to take to maximise the sale price on your own house.
So next question for you.
Yeah.
Many people are waiting for the perfect market to sell.
Yes.
What do you think about that? Is it a mistake? How do you handle this?
Yeah,
Just they're going, I might sell this week, I might sell in 3 months' time, or I'm watching this, I'm concerned about that, and so on.
look, there's things that we can control and there's things that we can't. So I would say 2 things we can control is, number one, I would say, is removing as many complications from your own sale. So if you think there's been something that needs to be done to your property that you've been thinking about for a long time, whether that's a roof leak that occurred or something that's been niggling in the back of your mind on the strata committee that you want to get solved, I would get onto that as a priority. And then the second thing is, which I've noticed moving away from COVID, which is a little bit unnatural, where everyone was at home and could see properties all the time. There's little windows, and I would call them sort of your A++ selling windows, and then you would have your sort of your B windows. So if I talk about A++, generally speaking, you've got the February to March market. We then take, which we just have.
And why is that? Is that because there's built-up demand from holidays, or how you find
Well, I think for 2 reasons. Number one, naturally, I think Australians love having a break over Christmas. So I notice most families, or everyone, as we lean into December, everyone's a bit worn down. It's been a big year at work. Kids or grandkids finish for school holidays. And I think the focus goes towards having a break. So look for times when there's renewed enthusiasm and buyers have good energy. So kids go back to school, first week of Feb or late Jan. People are back in, they're refreshed, they've had a break. And it's also a time when new listings hit the market. So renewed enthusiasm. I noticed there's an 8-week window, which is really a good selling moment. And that runs through till, as we've just seen, April, which can be a bit disconnected. This one, a bigger one, school holidays, long weekend, Easter, Anzac Day. So primarily not the best time to be launching a property. And then we'll probably see now, which we're in now, moving into mid-May. So moving into the first week of May, really nice running window till about the end of June.
Right.
I will see around end of financial year. We generally notice people are preoccupied, trying to finish off business reporting.
School holidays again.
School holidays. If you're lucky enough to, people take that moment to get away from the cold, whether they go north or overseas. And I noticed July is a bit of a quiet window. And then August, from about the first to second week of August, very, very busy time. And that's where some of my best selling months are August and September up to October long weekend. Again, we hit that long weekend, school holidays. So it's more about understanding where you've got high activity, and that's for both buying and selling. So you want to be in a position where you're selling in the best climate, but also you can see the most amount of listings that you might want to go and purchase.
On that though, just assume I can't pick those peak times because something else has happened, or I just need to sell, or I've got a job overseas and I want to get sold. How important then, let's take timing out because I can't pick the best, how important is strategy to getting it right? Yeah. And if I can't sell within, let's say, the peak. But obviously strategy is important anytime, but talk us a bit through that.
Well, I think there's the other thing, and if we're talking about that you don't get to pick the best time, so whether or not, I would be looking first if you've purchased first. So you see a great house, you love it, you've decided to secure that home. The one thing people forget about is the most negotiable item, which is settlement term. And I see a lot of people go and buy a property. They look at what's on the contract, they see 6 or 8 weeks, they fall in love with that property, and then they purchase it, and then they call me and go, "Oh, Tim, we've bought a property in the Southern Highlands or the Gold Coast."
No, we never do that as buyers. Why
unfortunately, too many people do it. And sometimes it's on Saturday at 5 o'clock, and they'll go,
I think I've done that myself, and I'm in the industry before. So,
I think I remember when you did. But that's the thing, I think, where having an advisor. So, like, I always say to people, and a lot of my clients now that have bought and sold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 properties with me, I say, if you see something you love, call me first. And what we'll do is try and navigate how far can we explore terms along with price to create a situation where you've got more control. So what that might look like, hypothetically, if we were buying a property in November that we loved, we hadn't sold yet, we've got to think a lot longer about terms. So I had a very good client do this. They purchased in early November. We were able to negotiate a settlement term through till April.
And you do all this just part of helping them out.
Yeah, so again,
you're not working as a buyer's aid, you're just working as to help them out.
No, but I think sort of giving forward is what you get back. And over time in the industry, you sort of realise you give as much probably free advice, and sometimes clients of mine won't buy for 7 years. But
how long have you been in the industry now?
20
years.
20 with
Still
you in 20. Yeah, I know. 20 in June.
It's gone quick.
I know.
You've seen a lot of properties. So
seen a lot, yeah.
So that on all of that, so I've got some more questions now I want to jump in.
Sure.
We're going to talk about pricing.
Yep.
Pricing isn't a guess, it's a conversation.
Yes.
Now, my only thing I'd say is, and I'll get you to talk us all through this, is that I notice in the industry as a whole, It's called buying the listing. There's a term.
Yeah.
In case the people listening out there haven't heard of this, what can happen? There is many brilliant agents. There's also people that will buy your listing by telling you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
So the example, just say it was a $2 million property. They might tell you it's worth 2.5. They know they're only going to get 2 because that's what the market. That said, we're not God and we can't control a price. Our role is to get as many bees to the honeypot to create competition.
Yes.
None of us can ever say hand on heart you're going to get that property, that price. Maybe if there was 50 in a unit block and they'd all sold a similar price, you'd be pretty close. But it is hard, right, with a house and location, and it also buys at the time. So what we don't want to do is have a property overpriced.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that, because obviously you can blow yourself out of the water, because you said to me, Pete, you're going to get 2.5 for your property because even though it's worth 2, I'm already going, I can buy a boat, I can buy a car, I'm going to have the holiday. So, and I've seen people list with agents, but then later on they've changed agents and they've sold at a realistic price, but it has damaged the value of the property, of how they've pitched
I've seen real estate agents selling their own homes and have them overpriced. So I think first things first is, again, when I look at human nature, and again with our own properties, it's, we can get a little bit closer to them, especially if we list them. So it's never ever to blame someone.
That's right, because my yellow letterbox looks better than the green letterbox next
to
it. So my house is definitely worth
You've sold, I've sold, and I think both we thought our properties. So the first thing is not to blame yourself for that. But in this market, it's probably even more important, because you may have a window of time where your best buyers are actually looking at your house, and after a period of time, you almost get to a point where you can really damage it. And so I think with the evolution of tech and websites and a lot of third-party websites, this information's freely available to the marketplace. The amount of days the property's been on the market, where the initial price guide was, where the price finished. So I think you have less places to hide, not only as an agent, but as a seller, if you get it incorrect at the start. So the way I usually look at this, and this is the most important part, is how, and I don't mind where an owner feels their house is worth, and or maybe what they would like to achieve. But our job is to be able to justify that really early. So if I'm a purchaser and I'm looking at a particular property as an agent, I've got to have a really good case study of how I've arrived at this property price. So to give you an example on a couple of big listings that we just sold in a pretty tough market down on the water, I had everything to square metre rates, growth over time. I had other new developments that were happening in the area where they were going to get priced at. So I could show past tense, I could show current market, and I could show them my expectations of future growth. Now, I'm talking with pretty smart people here that are looking at these listings, but I had that pre-prepared when those listings hit the market.
That's a bit how you build trust with the buyer, showing them realistic price and how you've got to a price expectation.
Correct. And I think the most important part when I'm working through with people selling their home is I go, look, initially, we need to make sense both online, but through the conversations with me as an agent, how are we justifying the initial value? And if we're talking about auction guides or bidding guides, that needs to make sense early. And that's where you'll see a purchaser goes, okay, well, I can identify with all this information the agent's given me. More importantly, what I say to a seller is it needs to make sense to someone that's sitting overseas, not that's an expert in your suburb, because they're some of your best buyers. So it's about how we articulate that we've arrived at the value with a huge amount of information. Then what you'll find, and this is from the seller's side, if it makes sense to 2 or 3 buyers initially, and then they're coming back, they'll transition from being pretty analytical to them becoming a little bit more emotional about the property, but they've already invested the time.
So I think that's the thing, especially it's always talked about in the industry where I know some people, unfortunately, within our industry have underpriced properties, way under where they should have been, to try to get more people there. But of course, that goes against them. They build a bad rapport, and it's illegal as well. How do you give people? Is it more around, like when I say about giving people confidence of the price expectation? I know, especially if you're going to auction, none of us know what it's going to go for. As we said before, it's not like we're selling, a Daihatsu truck, and we know that roughly the price range is give or take 10 grand. We don't know in property, but we have to be able to give people substantial information based on the price. So when people are coming to you and saying, hey, Tim, I'm looking at this waterfront, and you're showing them square meterage and your rates to give them confidence, is there any more you can add to that?
Well, I think you got it from an agent's point of view. Now our role is to be able to, like, for example, and look, yes, we have situations where things can get carried away or a buyer says, oh, hey, I know I pay a little bit more, but we really, really in love with the property. I think as an agent, this trust element needs to be built on both sides. And I think, if I look now at a lot of the properties I'm selling, they're right in and around the price guide. Because what we've done is sit with the client, give the client really good idea on where to price the property. But also we're happy to pass that information over to the buyer. I think that's the same. Whatever you're providing the owner, the buyer should get too. And don't get me wrong, I think with great marketing, you can get then a little bit more competition. But I think this is the point. As a buyer, if I was in the market, I would be asking for the same. How did you arrive at the numbers? Or can you give me a little bit more information? And, I genuinely feel I don't want someone getting in the car and driving 2 hours to see a property on a Saturday, or bringing their family back and kids that are not going to be in a position to purchase that property. So it wastes everyone's time. And I think this is where you'll see longer term agents in the industry selling in a certain area, and they continue to do well, is because they've gotten themselves to a point where they build trust with both the buyer and seller. I think that's really important, especially at the moment, if not more so, because, I think there's an easy way to spend time, money and energy in a purchaser without a clear guide.
So just a bit more on pricing, because I think it's one of the biggest things I see that where vendors get it wrong.
Yes.
And we were just chatting about earlier that, Agent X says, hey, I'm going to get you 2.4.
Yeah.
But, you're looking at it and you're going, it's around 2 every day. It stays long.
Yeah.
It's about 2. But that other agent is just trying to win the business by trying to convince the vendor they're going to get that price. And as I said before, we can't guarantee a price. I think you can't say it's going to hit that's going to be less. But from a pricing strategy point of view,
yes,
how strategic is important is that for you? But how do you educate the consumer or the vendor to say, hey, look, he's telling you 2.4.
Yeah.
We're seeing the market. How do you handle that situation? And I know you won't win every business because some clients will say, I'm going to go with them because the greed factor kicks in, right? We're going to buy the boat with the extra 400. How do you handle that situation, or what advice would you give that potential vendor when they're that disparity where the 5 other agents have said it's 2 and this guy over here said it's 2.4?
I think, and this probably comes from, especially in this market, I always think it's a good idea to look up and see how much the agent has sold, who they're working with, ask for some references. But it usually comes from a place of desperation. And we are in a tough market. And I'm not saying in any way that it's right, but certain agents could become desperate. So their quickest path is, if I offer the lowest in fees and tell them the highest price, I'm positioning myself maybe to get the listing. But I think a pretty good question, if I was sitting in that position, and I've actually had some people I've told to ask this to particular agents before, is, well, if you just called that agent today, because I said the biggest for the agent, their cost is time. For you, we could be talking $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 in advertising, plus getting the house ready, plus getting the kids out to be in a position in 3 weeks' time, which is a real
quite
cost.
Stressful when you're selling.
Well, it's a lot. I think it's not just the marketing cost, but it's getting the property ready, it's communicating, it's stepping out of work meetings so you can talk with the agent to be in a position 3 weeks down the track where clearly you were overpromised on price. A really quick question is to say, well, okay, I understand that your price of the property there, it's a little bit higher than where we've quoted, but if you were to sell it less than that price that you're promising us, would you pay for all the advertising on the property? And you'll figure out really quickly, and we would. We've got some kind of. Well, you'll get a very good sense very, very quickly if the agent is pricing your property to get the business. I think the other element which I would definitely look at as well on that is referring back to, I would be looking at agent experience, time in industry, the most recent sales they've had, and there's some great websites you can actually see where the property was originally priced to where it's sold for.
It might be good, Tim, at the end of this, we can put in some links to some of those websites so people can look. So I might just jump there, as we're talking about the biggest cost in real estate isn't the commission, right? It's a bad decision. Yeah. Now, particularly most sellers, even when I wasn't in real estate, you go, the first questions we ask sort of are, well, what's your commission?
Yeah.
How much are you going to charge me?
Yes.
Maybe we'll ask what the marketing costs and how much am I going to get for my property? Now, this is where, unfortunately, they're not asking the right decisions.
Yeah.
So many sellers are just focusing on those commission and what they're paying. Why is that a bad decision? And what should they be asking?
Well, I think the big thing is, number one, is I would be, if I was a seller in a market, I know this could be challenging for people that have got an investment property interstate, but if you've got a friend there, get to go and do it. Number one is, I would be actually going through some of the agents' open homes, and seeing what the process with that agent looks like. Go and try before you buy. So many people don't do this. I always say to my team, I go, imagine that whoever's turning up today could be a future client, right? So what's our follow-up? What's it look like after? But see how that process is from a buying point of view, because that's what you're signing up for. And many agents can sit and promise the world, and we do all of these things, but I think I would do a try before you buy. So I would do my research in the market about that agent and or agency. And then the second thing I'd talk through is options. Like everything within the world of real estate, buying and selling is negotiable. So whether or not if that agent says, well, I've got an abundance of clients. So the biggest thing I hear all the time is this secret database, a treasure trove of offshore expats that no one else has access to. Now, it's simply unrealistic. So I would be looking at minimizing an agency time. Like, why don't you look if there's an agent that is hypothetically on the price, as you were saying, is promising you 2.5 and all the other agents are sitting at 2.2, give them a week agency. Tell them to bring their best buyers through if they're so confident about it.
Just bring them
without
off the
marketing,
database. Yep.
off the database, because they're telling you that there's an expat in Hong Kong that's going to pay 2.5, which I hear about every day. Still yet to meet him. But I think that gives you a try before you buy. And in that moment, I'd be saying, okay, well, is the agent turning up on time? What's their team look like? Are you getting that agent? Or is a junior turning up? And more importantly, is it realistic that they've got a buyer at that price level? I'd be very also, advice would be, which I hear a lot of, which is the scariest element, is about offers versus interest. So if you're off market and or you've had an agent take buyers through your property, define what the interest really looks like before you go and commit to something.
Such a loose term, doesn't it?
It's really loose. So for me, an offer is in writing with price and terms. Primarily, that person has provided you with evidence that they've passed the contract on to their solicitor. They've been through your property once, if not twice, and you've got something in writing that you can be passed on to from the agent. That is very different than interest. And I think that allows you to then go and pursue a purchase. Whereas, I think just get clear around what it actually looks like.
So a couple of questions on that.
Yeah.
And I'm a vendor.
Yeah.
What do I need to guard myself against making poor decisions around pricing, presentation, method of sale? I know we've probably covered a lot of this already, but what do I need to be fearful of as the vendor? This might be the first time I sell my property.
Yeah.
It might be the second or third time I've done it in my life.
Yeah.
And I've met an agent at an open house and he said, oh, yeah, come and appraise my property. But I haven't really looked into him yet. And I'm elaborate. I know it's a hard one.
I think the big thing you've got to look at, and again, there's a variety of so people are selling investment properties, they're selling principal place of residence, and it depends on the level of research you've got in that suburb. Yeah. So I think for me, if I was in an area where I could navigate to, I'd go through, I'd meet the agents, I'd meet their teams, I'd go and see how they passively, without telling them, see how they operate. Is that the kind of I always want to think that someone that's a buyer with us goes, oh, would we sell with Tim and the team and Catherine because we enjoy the experience as a purchaser? So I think that's the key, because these are the people that will be representing your house.
And we have to work with them for 4 weeks or more.
Yeah, so I think the thing is you never, for me as an agent, I never want to have someone that feels like they're locked into an agreement. I want to be chosen because they've experienced dealing with us first. And then I would still do research, more importantly on price. I'd be cross-checking different agents, different agencies.
What they've sold for, maybe what they've listed.
Yeah, but I think also as a consumer, and here is one path that I would go down, is that there is a little bit of an onus as a consumer now, which I think you should be doing your own research. There are so many incredible websites. Again, we can leave some in the comments or on the video, but there's an abundance of information. This wasn't here 10 years ago. And so you can really dig and do some incredible research and get some really good estimates from these websites on a median on where your property could sit. And I think that compiled with the other information, it just gives you a starting place as a foundation.
And I think people listening today, don't be hesitant to ask your agent questions.
Yeah.
Find out what they've sold, as Tim said.
Yeah.
How long they've been doing it, how they see it, so you can get a judgment, are they overpricing? But you need to understand where you think your property may sell. And now we all know that houses can vary widely in price, and we also know that buyer can turn up from out of area. And I've done this myself. I bought once at Newport and I was from Manly, and I'm going, well, Newport's cheap. I was happy to pay $150,000 more than the other people because it was still so cheap compared to Manly. So that does happen. But
Absolutely.
just going forward a little bit, if I'm thinking of selling, just wrapping this up today, but if I'm thinking of selling the next 6 to 12 months, what do you think I should be doing right now to put myself in the strongest position to get my property ready and or be ready to sell?
And I think this defines whether or not buying or selling are a combination of all. But I think the most important part is I'd be starting to meet agents now and getting assessments. I'd be actively looking and researching in the areas that I want to buy. I would be speaking with a mortgage broker or a lender, and this is a lot of clients don't do it. The perfect house comes up. We've already got an estimation or some off-market feedback on their property, but they haven't organised bridging finance as a backup solution. So I'd be getting finance in place to mean that if it was the home of our dreams, but the owner, for example, it could be an estate sale and they want to settle in 6 weeks. Have you got the facility to be able to purchase and then carry the sale of your own property? I'd be getting a contract of sale drawn up, speaking with the conveyancer solicitor. Are there any things that we're missing? Is there any information we've got to get together? Little things. You might have built something on the back deck or done something you can't find where the certification is. So get everything watertight to where you could sell the property tomorrow. And then definitely, if and as you get close to that period of time, I'll be moving through that X-ray process. Getting yourself an idea on where you can sell the property. How long is it going to take? What kind of settlement terms are your own buyers looking for? Is everyone okay to settle in 6 weeks? So I think there's a lot you can do early on that I see a lot of people don't do without rushing. And I think...
So I think speak to an agent early.
Agents, I would say, early. Agents. Utilize some of the websites we provide. So just start doing your own research, preliminary, and then I believe get those other things organised. So agents, pricing, external information, research yourself, conveyancer solicitor, getting a contract prepared early. Why wait 6 months? Have it ready. So what happens if you've purchased a property and the right buyer is floating around? Can you sell it to them? Presentation, house, start early. Don't leave the broken front fence to now. Chip away at it over time so that when you get to that, it doesn't feel like an enormous amount of work and compression within a week or two. And then again, the other one that I said is mortgage broker and or bank manager that you deal with, just to have the facility of bridging finance or to know if you can get that lined up, which reduces the stress on purchasing.
So thanks, Tim. Thanks for today. I know people will have questions, and certainly we'll have Tim's details here. So if you have a question, I'm sure he's happy to answer it. Even if you haven't listed with him, he might be able to give you some advice, but he's pretty busy carrying many listings, so with lots of clients. But feel free to ask questions, because for a lot of us, we only do it once or twice in our life, maybe sometimes 3 times now. But ask those questions. We're happy to help. And Tim, thanks again.
No problem.